We're pleased to welcome to the program now Congressman Michael Guest. He represents Mississippi's 3rd District. Representative Guest, thanks for joining us this morning, sir.
Gerard, good to talk to you again.
Yes, sir. So since we last talked, a whole lot of stuff's happened up there in Washington, and perhaps the highest profile legislation that was deliberated for quite some time and was touch and go for a while, recently signed into law by the president, the debt ceiling bill, the so-called debt ceiling bill, which would allow the government to return to borrowing money to pay the bills. You were a no on the measure. Tell us about it, Congressman.
Yeah, and you're right, Gerard. This is something that we've been talking about and knew since new Congress was sworn in January that there would be an X date. We were unsure exactly when that X date would be. That would really be dependent upon the money coming into the United States Treasury versus money going out. Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, originally notified Congress and the White House that the X date where we would actually be spending more money than we were bringing in would be June the 1st, and that set off really a scramble of negotiations ultimately between Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden. McCarthy had been trying since February to get Biden to negotiate terms for the debt ceiling either being raised or what later ended up being suspended, and came out with some concessions from the administration to suspend the debt ceiling to the end of next year. And it was a bill that was supported by both Republicans and Democrats, but also a bill that members from both sides did not support. I ended up voting against the legislation, and my rationale was I just thought it didn't go far enough. I think that we are continuing to spend money at a pace that I'm extremely concerned about, that it is unsustainable. And I feel like that we missed an opportunity to do more to address the spending problem that we have in Washington, D.C.
Barely passed, right?
It did. It passed, particularly the House, somewhat overwhelmingly. I think that about 65% of the Republicans in the House supported the legislation. Yeah. I think somewhere between 70 and 75% of the Democrats in the House supported it. And then when it was voted on in the Senate, I don't remember the exact number, but they were able to pass fairly easily in the Senate. I will say that both of our Mississippi senators, Senator Roger Wicker and Cindy Hyde-Smith, also voted no on the legislation.
Yeah, and what I meant to say, my apologies, the original debt ceiling bill that passed the House that Speaker McCarthy used as his bargaining chip, if you will, that's what barely passed the House. I mean, pretty much on a partisan basis, as you would expect. And then once it got doctored up by the parties negotiating on behalf of the chambers and the president, it garnered bipartisan support. And so it really didn't find any trouble passing and then ultimately getting signed. One of the things that concerned me, you mentioned Secretary Janet Yellen, a little bit of fear-mongering I felt like was going on, especially from the Democrats, basically pounding the drum that we were going to default on our interest and principal payments on our debt, which would certainly have been catastrophic economically. But, Congressman, we still have $400 billion a month coming into the Treasury. Now, I understand we're spending over $500 billion, but, okay, if it means you guys would have to figure out how to pay the bills and work with that, the first thing you're going to do is pay that $50 billion on the debt, so to avoid default.
Yeah, and just like when we shut the government down, Gerard, if we don't pass appropriations bills and there's temporary government shutdowns, which we've had in the past, ultimately, once we're able to find a solution to the impasse, everyone is paid when we have a government shutdown.
Yeah.
And I believe that that's exactly what would have happened in this situation. If we would not have agreed on anything, then the Treasury Secretary, she would have had to prioritize which bills she was going to pay immediately.
Sure.
And then after we were able to resolve the debt ceiling, then any bills that we had not not paid, then those creditors would have been made whole. And so, I thought some of the skies falling type of things that people were claiming, I thought that they may have been a little overblown. It would have had some impact on our financial markets, but I believe the markets would have recovered after we would have passed legislation. Really the only concern, the long-term concern that I had, was what would it do to the rate at which the United States government is able to borrow money.
Sure.
We know that we have a very low interest rate because the possibility of the default, particularly long-term default, is slim to none. And so there would have been some potential long-term impact there, but I believe a lot of the fear-mongering that we can't get past this X date, and if we do, is going to have dire effects not only on the U.S. economy, but the global economy. I thought many of those claims were overblown.
Yeah, we'd have found the $50 billion to make the interest and principal payments. That's the point with the money we had coming in to avoid defaulting on our obligations on our treasuries. That was really something they used. And I would read your colleague Hakeem Jeffries' tweets on a daily basis between him and the president, and the fear-mongering was just over the top and honestly just inaccurate, just wasn't truthful. But a lot of people don't know that, and they take that to the bank, and and they hold your side accountable for it, unfortunately.
Well, and if you look at this versus a clean debt ceiling, I mean, clearly there were concessions that McCarthy and his negotiating team were able to obtain from the White House.
Yeah.
But again, if you compare it to the Limit Save Grow Act, which you talked about narrowly passed the House several months ago, the bill does not go as far as that legislation would have. And look, we live in an era of divided government. Republicans control 1/2 of 1/3 of the federal government.
Yeah.
And so, for people to say that this was the worst deal ever and Republicans got nothing out of it, I would argue that statement is factually incorrect. But I will tell you that there were many individuals, including myself, who voted against it because we feel like it did not go far enough.
Gotcha. Let's turn our attention to something here in the state of Mississippi on federal installation, our VA on the coast, displaying the pride flag. And that got noticed, and, boy, that got folks created quite a commotion. You wrote a letter, didn't you?
I did. Actually, the entire delegation, Republican members of the delegation, sent a letter this week. I was notified of it, I guess, late last week. The facility in question down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and so I had a couple people reach out to me, share a local news article that the pride flag was flying over a VA facility down in South Mississippi. I reached out to Congressman Mike Guest, since that is geographically the area that he represents. He was aware of it. His office was in the process of doing an individual letter, which he actually sent on Friday. Mm-hmm. The entire delegation signed a letter Monday, which was sent asking that flag be removed. And so whether it be a pride flag, a Black Lives Matter flag, a pro-law enforcement flag, I don't believe that's proper for things of that nature to be flown by our federal government. There are those are social issues, and we're bringing social issues into the government arena, and it's just inappropriate that we have an administration that is allowing these types of displays to occur. And so the entire delegation felt very strongly, and I was proud to have been able to join that letter. And we hope that we'll see the interim director of that facility that she'll consider responding to the concerns that we've raised, and we would like to see that flag removed.
Yeah, so true. And I mean, it's a military installation essentially, and it should fly the American flag is what it should fly. And
that's right.
and
And look, I mean, I think to some service members that it's offensive, and I think that we should do everything within our power not to engage in these social issues where people have a very strongly held views one way or the other. If someone were to have flown a Christian flag there over that facility,
right.
there would have been individuals that might have had concerns about that, and so I think it is wrong when we begin to, particularly on social issues, to be flying flags either in support of one side or the other. That's not.
We got a break right here, Congressman. We got a break. We'll come back, talk some more. Mississippi, we've got Congressman Michael Guest on the line with us. He represents Mississippi's 3rd District. So, well, I'm glad that you guys addressed that with the flag. And I got to say, Congressman, I appreciate your position on that. It's not necessarily a slant on the LGBTQ community. We shouldn't really promote or give some sort of special treatment by flying a flag that represents any specific group. It's the United States, and this is a military installation of the United States. It represents all people, and that's why the American flag and perhaps maybe a branch of the armed services flag are appropriate, but nothing else in my view.
Yeah, and I agree 100%, and I think that was some of the language within the letter that when we sent it to the Secretary of the VA, that, look, we don't want our VA facilities to be politicized, supporting one group or the other. Right. We ought to represent all veterans. Anything that we fly, again, should be related to their service, either the American flag or, as you mentioned, one of the flags of one of our branches of armed services, and we should limit it to that in its entirety.
Absolutely. All right, so we've got a possible investigation going on in the House. Representative Comer from Kentucky looks like he's trying to get FBI Director Wray to release some documents and come testify. How's that going?
This has been an ongoing battle that Chairman Comer has had with Director Wray, particularly over what's known as a Form FD 1023. And so there was a form, a non-classified document that was in the possession of the FBI in which an informant, a long-time paid informant of the FBI who had worked at the behest of the FBI for over a decade, made a report to the FBI that this individual had firsthand knowledge of a conversation with a foreign national that would have linked at that point Vice President Joe Biden with having accepted basically a bribe, would have accepted funds to try to for quid pro quo actions here in the United States. And so that was reported to the FBI. The FBI then documented that in that Form FD 1023. The House oversight was made aware of that when there was a confidential informant, a whistleblower, if you will, that came forward and reported that that document was in the possession of the FBI. And so for months now, Comer has been trying to, one, verify the existence of the document, and he was able to verify the existence of the document. He and the ranking member were shown a redacted copy of that document earlier this week. But since that document is not classified, since there's no ongoing investigation that anyone is aware of regarding these allegations, we think that that document needs to be released first to the Committee of Jurisdiction, which is the oversight, and later to the public as a whole. And the FBI director has refused to do that. He's refused to share the document with anyone outside of the chairman and the ranking member, making claims that it would put his informants at risk if that document was released. We've tried to make reasonable concessions with the FBI, allowing them to redact out things that would make it more easily or more easy to identify this whistleblower. but the FBI director has dug in, and so there will be a hearing which will be set later this week before the Oversight Committee, that if some resolution is not reached, the Oversight Committee intends to hold a vote as to whether to hold the FBI director in contempt of Congress.
Does the House have the power to say, draw up impeachment papers against a director of an agency like this? Does it have any power as to just the disposition of Director Wray in that seat?
Yeah. Now, what would most likely happen if Oversight does vote to hold the FBI director in contempt, then it would go to the House floor probably sometimes next week for a full vote of the entire House.
Okay.
And at that point, Director Wray would then be referred to the Department of Justice to see whether or not criminal penalties should be imposed for his inability or unwillingness to comply with a proper oversight component of the United States Congress.
Okay.
If he fails to do so, it would be proper for Congress to consider whether or not that would be an act or conduct that would be an impeachable offense. But the House could very well at some point, if they chose to do so, if FBI Director Wray continues not to comply with the lawful request of Congress, he could not only found to be in contempt of Congress, but there could be an impeachment investigation began against the FBI Director.
Okay, makes sense. Is this something you're receiving a fair amount of calls from your constituents about, that they see this as just the height of corruption in Washington, and they want you and your Republican colleagues to take action and to press forward with this investigation?
You know, this is something that people back home have been talking about for some period of time. Again, this is just another instance that we can add to that. I think that there is a broad distrust of government, particularly at the federal level. Mm-hmm. And so as we look at kind of the pattern of the FBI, and particularly those, not the rank and file FBI agents, because, you know, as a prosecutor, I work very closely with members of the Jackson Field office, and I'll tell you that many of those individuals did outstanding work. They assisted our state and local law enforcement officers in solving crimes and apprehending defendants who had fled the jurisdiction. But I think the apprehension by most people in Mississippi relates to the people at the very top, and they feel like that, if you will, that the deck is stacked against conservatives, mm-hmm. That the FBI has become politicized, and I think that there are some very valid concerns and some very valid arguments that individuals are making about those people at the very top of the Department of Justice.
Speaking of possible impeachment, is there still continuing talk about possibly proceeding with such on Secretary Mayorkas for his handling of the border?
Those conversations are still ongoing. The first thing we really wanted to do in the Homeland Security Committee was to get our border bill out of committee onto the House floor and passed off the House floor. We were able to do that several weeks ago. And so now we can turn to more of an oversight component, and we can begin really drilling down on what Secretary Mayorkas did or didn't do to create the crisis that we've seen on the border. Mm-hmm. We do know that since Title 42 has expired, we have seen a temporary reprieve on the border as far as the numbers of encounters, but we believe that it is very likely that those numbers in the next several weeks will return to the baseline, basically where those numbers were prior to the expiration of Title 42. And Republicans also have concerns about the continued expansion of the CBP One app. It is an app administered by the Department of Homeland Security, and it allows individuals who want to come into the country to claim asylum to go on the app, to be able to set up appointments, to be able to legally enter the country where those claims are then vetted, and in many cases to be allowed to remain in the country. And so we know that currently DHS is able to process roughly 1,000 applicants a day. They're seeking to expand that very quickly to 40,000. And so what many people, including myself, see is the Department of Homeland Security is using this as a workaround, a shell game, if you will, to allow individuals to enter the country, to stay in the country for their asylum claims, but they're not counted against the encounter numbers that we've seen Border Patrol report over the last several years. And so this is a way, if you will, to take those numbers off the books. And so if you pull the encounter numbers that CBP is reporting, you see a decrease or a drop in those numbers. But part of the reason is because of the expansion in the use of the CBP One app, which many Republicans, including myself, feel that is not a valid use for that tool, that was really designed more for trade, to be able to help individuals who were trying to bring goods into the country to be able to use that to expedite that, and it's now been something that this administration is using to continue to funnel individuals into the country based on asylum claims that they're making.
Well, it's consistent because I've watched the president's speech after the debt ceiling bill was signed, and most of what he said there really was inaccurate and distortion of real math and real numbers as well. Congressman, always appreciate you coming on the program and giving us an update from Washington. I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Gerard. Have a great day.
You too, sir. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth Studios. Stay